Very cool.
Nice. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
That's good.
Those on the West Coast is up very early.
Are we live yet? I think we are.
I see it.
Thank you. I will stop my share.
Right, we're live. Okay, so welcome to this keynote of the third day of the Open Security Summit. So this is going to be delivered by Danny Lopez, which is the CEO of Glasswall, which happens to also be my boss. And it's very interesting because we do have lots of conversations about security. You know, he also cares deeply about it, and that's why I invited him to share his views on how he he thinks about it and his positioning. And I also is going to cover something which is very, I think, interesting for us, because we're also in a big transformation how we operate, and that also has a lot of security implications. So over to you, Danny.
Dennis, thank you very much. And well, thank you firstly to everybody at the Open Security Summit, because obviously this is not how you plan to deliver this year's program. And I think having been involved in so many different Zoom-based virtual conferences over the last few weeks, you guys are doing an amazing job. I mean, this is day 3, tremendous content so far. Great engagement, so much more to look forward to, yeah, huge thanks, because I know how much work goes into putting these together. So what I wanted to do today, unfortunately for everybody joining us today, this is basically me. You're just going to see me for the next 20-25 minutes. I'm not going to share any slides, because I just thought it would be good to be able to give you a few thoughts on kind of what we're seeing, the trends that we've been monitoring and focusing on over the last few months, the way we see things going forward. And then I also wanted to give you, as Dennis mentioned, a few thoughts from where we're coming from when we think a lot about how teams should be structured, organizational design in the world of COVID, but not so much COVID, just kind of everything that's been leading up to how we think about org design and how teams should be structured going forward. So those are the two areas that I wanted to cover. The first thing I would say in terms of what are we seeing right now is that threats they're constantly evolving. I mean, I realize that I'm stating the obvious in many ways, but it is fascinating, because at the end of the day, we're all doing what we're doing because we want to keep people and organizations safe. And we find that we are facing sometimes common enemies, sometimes enemies that sort of just crop up left, right, and center. And that whole space is just constantly changing. And, the former CEO of TalkTalk, Dido Harding, used to say that we spend all our time building walls, and the bad guys are just building ladders. And these walls are getting taller and taller, and these ladders are getting taller and taller too. And that's kind of the nature of our business. And in a way, it makes it different from so many others, because the more innovative we are, the more innovative the bad actors are, and that sort of just kind of constantly defines the state of speed and pace and thinking that we have to put into delivering the solutions that we do. But I think that pace is just going to get faster and faster over the next few months and the next few years. And it's not just because of the bad actors, but it's also because our worlds, our everyday lives, are increasingly defined by technology. And the more tech there is, the more threats there are going to be, and it just goes hand in hand. On the one hand, we think about 5G and we think about blockchain, and we think about AI, and these are all bringing extraordinary benefits to us as people, as companies, and to society. But with those benefits come a whole host of threats, and it's the name of the game, and that's what we're heading into. The second thing I'd focus on, which I think is, on the one hand very scary, on the other hand we can make such a significant impact to be able to help. And I say we as the the security community, is the increase of threats that SMEs are facing, small and medium enterprises. I feel that it just doesn't get much media attention. If you have a massive data breach in a huge company, you read about it. But the SMEs, the small players, they don't get the coverage. But the reality is that when it happens, it can be crippling, and it can bring a company down in minutes. And I think that it's our responsibility to make sure that we try and help this community as much as possible, because they are very vulnerable. They are, in my mind, the least prepared, because SMEs, particularly the sort of smaller end of SMEs, they're thinking about their cash, they're thinking about the cost base, and they're thinking about a whole host of challenges. And I'm generalizing, but the reality is that you try and put some money towards coming up with a few solutions that you might have heard are going to be helpful, and then you just cross your fingers and you hope for the best. And the former FBI director Robert Mueller used to say that there are basically two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. And that is just the reality that we are facing right now. And whenever I talk to SMEs myself, and we as a team do, and I think industry as a whole, we don't want to scare them. We don't want to go down this route of saying, do something about your security, because otherwise the world is going to end. The fear factor, I don't think is helpful. But there is a very important element of overall education around threats, the impact of threats, how you go about securing your company as a whole, how you learn about cybersecurity and the solutions that can be put forward. Because it really, ultimately, I think it's only when something really bad happens many times that a lot of the smaller companies pay attention. Sort of famous Mike Tyson quote that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, and I think that happens, unfortunately, quite a lot in the SME space. So that's something that we're very focused on, and as I say, it's a sort of overall education process, and one that I think over the next few months, particularly with the current environment, is going to become more and more important. Another issue that I would raise are data breaches. I don't think they're going away. This is something that we're just going to hear more and more about, that we as an industry need to be able to offer, obviously, solutions to. But whether it's EasyJet recently, or BA was a high-profile one, NHS. I'm talking about examples here in the UK. There are countless others around the world. Unfortunately, I think that this is just going to become something that we're going to have to get used to reading about, and hopefully the industry being able to do far more about it. I mean, it's quite worrying that some companies spend decades building their reputation, and in a matter of seconds that reputation can just be shattered with a data breach. And we see that a lot with many of the big companies that we read about, and there are some very interesting studies about the overall perception of towards that company, and the overall reputational impact is absolutely massive. And the reality is that what the bad guys are stealing is worth a lot of money. There is a lot of value to it in a whole bunch of unfortunate markets out there, and a combination of the impact on the company, the reputational impact, and the value of the data that can be captured, I think will mean that we unfortunately will be seeing more of that in months to come. The next piece is something that I'm sure we all talk about a lot, and that's the fact that as business processes, as infrastructure moves to the cloud, we as an industry are seeing more and more that we have to come up with new approaches to be able to come up with solutions that are cloud native and that help people with this transition. Obviously, that has become extremely relevant over the last 3 months, where overnight hundreds of thousands of people have suddenly had to work from home. There is a far more reliance on the cloud, and the solutions that used to work, kind of pre-COVID and pre that, transition, are not necessarily going to work going forward. And I don't think that COVID has changed anything in particular, but I think what it has done is just accelerated that need to be able to come with a whole bunch of different approaches. Something else that we talk a lot about is doing more with less. Again, obvious, but the challenges are increasing. We have to move incredibly fast, speed up processes. And I think the automation piece here is absolutely key. You know, trying to identify every single manual process that we can, and how we're going to automate that. The DevOps environment now is moving steadily into a DevSecOps environment, so that security is very much at the heart of the entire journey. You know, whether it's building, testing, deploying. Security is, as I say, at the very, very core of that process. And the more we get that right, the more we are going to be able to ship sufficient and, more importantly, just as importantly, efficient software. So I think that there'll be a huge, huge rise in focus on the automation piece. Moving away a little bit from kind of, you know, our day-to-day, I think that's we also, as an industry and as leaders in the cybersecurity space, we have to stay really connected to the geopolitical macro environment that we're all facing. And I think that even, you know, when we're talking to our clients, when we're talking to people in the ecosystem, understanding what's going on between, you know, Russia-US tensions, China-US tensions, you know, the entire geopolitical landscape that, you know, let's face it, is more chaotic now than, well, it's definitely more chaotic now than it has been ever in my lifetime from a sort of global geopolitical standpoint. And I think that's very important to understand, because it feeds into you know, accepting that state-sponsored cyber attacks are going to continue increasing, not just in frequency, but in impact, in sophistication. And you know, this chaotic geopolitical landscape that I mentioned is essentially just an ideal environment for that to thrive. And we have to accept that. We have to be ready for it. We have to anticipate it in many ways, and then we need to be able to act on it. And, you know, just as importantly, we need to be able to give advice to all of our clients. And we can, of course, give a lot of advice on the technical side. But as I say, I think just giving advice on the technical side, it sort of loses its spark and it loses its context if you don't actually have a, you know, pretty decent understanding about what the overall macro geopolitical tensions are in the first place. Sort of rushing through content here, conscious of time, but a few more things to share. Just like I think data breaches are here to stay, unfortunately, I would say exactly the same about phishing attacks. They're really effective. It just needs one person per however many thousands or even hundreds of thousands to have real impact. And if anything, that efficiency, unfortunately, is increasing. So they're here to stay, which means that we have a greater responsibility to do something about it. Which brings me to that sort of conversation around culture and training, which I think is hugely important, but at the same time, I think it's important to kind of make a big distinction about what training and culture can actually do versus what it can't do. Because there are, I think, too many companies out there who think that if you train people the right way, who are not necessarily, you know, that tech savvy, and you instill this culture of security, then you won't get attacked. Or if you do get attacked, you know, people will be trained, therefore it won't happen. And I think that's a very, very potentially grave mistake to make. I think the right level of training is all about awareness, and awareness can go a long way to playing an important role in security, but it's definitely not a solution. A few of us spoke recently to doctors in the front line who receive loads of attachments, and, you know, obviously that's what we do at Glasswall. We help organizations with the threat from file-based threats. And the reality is that a doctor is a doctor and wants to spend his or her time helping others and applying what they're good at. What they don't want to do is spend, you know, 10% of their day every time they get an attachment trying to figure out whether they should open it or shouldn't open it, or how they go about opening it, etc. So I think that there's an element of overall awareness that is important, but in this particular example, a doctor should spend, you know, 99.9% of their time on what they are trained to do. So I think that the culture piece is important, the awareness piece is important, but it's our responsibility to provide solutions that will actually deal with these threats. a lot of talk around whether COVID has accelerated and increased the number of attacks by using COVID as a sort of way in. I think the reality is that the bad guys will always exploit vulnerabilities, and they will always draw on people when they're at their most vulnerable. So I don't think it's necessarily an issue around COVID has led to an increase in attacks. I think COVID is just provides a nice, easy way in. Just like the US election will provide a nice way in 3 or 4 months' time. And this, big global events that essentially kind of mark our day-to-day, distract us from a lot, because we're spending so much kind of emotional tension worrying about that issue, that then you get something in your inbox that's related to that, and all of a sudden you're not as sharp as you should be. So I don't think it's linked necessarily to more attacks. I just think it's an easier gateway. A couple of final thoughts on security before I move to team structures. Firstly, there is, I think, a skills gap in the cyberspace, and the more I speak to other CEOs and people in the industry, I think we all accept that we need more cyber knowledge. We need more cyber trained people, and there is a gap, and hopefully one that we will be able to address over the next few months. But it's a challenge for us as an industry, which you wouldn't have in a number of others. The other thing I'd say is something that we take very, very seriously, and we talk a lot about humility and learning at Glasswall. And I think it's a really important topic to spend just 30 seconds on, because when something goes wrong internally, two things can happen. You can just sort of try and hide it and sort of move on and think about the next challenge, or you can do a massive deep dive into understanding why something went wrong and what learnings you as a company are going to take going forward. And I think that in cyber security, that is extremely important. Being able to put your hand up internally and saying, there was a mistake, let's learn from it, let's apply maximum humility, let's analyze to death, let's share amongst everybody in the company, and let's have that spirit of openness and collaboration is key. Because without learning, you're not ready for the next one. And then the final piece that I wanted to touch upon on security is the fact that I don't think there's any silver bullet on anything. I mean, if I think about us, we deal with threats in attachments. Attachments are weaponized these days. They can be undetected in inboxes or shared drives for a very long time, and then one unfortunate click and you have a problem. We know that traditional solutions are not enough to be able to deal with this problem, and we have we've invested very heavily in having the technology that deals with this threat. Are we a silver bullet? No, we're not a silver bullet. We are extremely good at what we do. And we are one solution when companies are facing a whole host of problems, not just ours, but a number of others. And so I think a layered approach to security, where you're able to draw in world-class solutions for different problems, is where we're at. But what we are not at is two solutions will solve my entire life. And I think that's very important, because understanding that a layered approach is the way to be able to deal with threats, we think is key. Right, I haven't got long left, so let me move very quickly to the more human side, the organizational design side, and team structures, which is something that we spend a lot of time talking about. And I think it's fair to say that over the last 3 decades, whether it's digital revolution, remote working, freelance working, has changed the way we're structured. I mean, I remember working at Barclays 20 years ago, and we were already working from home. We didn't call it working from home. You had to call it LIW, location independent working, because there was a real stigma about saying that you were working from home. And this is the sort of what I think we always used to think is ironic. The bank used to say to us, please work from home, but don't tell anybody that you're working from home. And that, to me, is the sort of journey that we've been on over the last 20 years, where we're actually encouraging people to work from home. Actually, at the moment we have to, but it's fine that we talk about it. And I think that that's been one of the key changes. And COVID has obviously just accelerated it. I don't think we're in a world now where it's about employee numbers. Employee numbers don't equate to growth. They don't equate to profitability. Employee engagement equates to profitability. And so then we all face this challenge of flat structures, hierarchy, what does organizational design look like? I think it's different for, a lot of it is driven sometimes by personalities. I'm not a believer in, massive hierarchy. I'm not a believer in a completely flat structure. Somewhere in the middle, leaning more towards flat. But I think that there is very dangerous sometimes to think that you can achieve everything you need to, however big or small the company is, particularly however small, by having a flat structure. Because if you lack those internal processes, if you lack the ability to be able to go to somebody, you lack the overall direction and vision that some people are going to provide. I'm not saying you need 10, 15 layers, but you need something that allows you to be able to operate effectively as a team. And I think that that's something that, we probably all grapple with. So the challenge I always think is, how flat can you go without being completely flat? And that's kind of, the overall theme that we follow when we try and come up with the right solutions to organizational design. Obviously, agility is absolutely key. You can set up teams for specific projects and then you can disband them. We do a lot of that. We operate in many ways through a squad model. And I think that's all part of how teams are going to evolve, as long as everybody is abiding by the same values. There's a total understanding of what goals are, and there is alignment on that, because operating in an agile squad environment where actually you lose track of what you're trying to achieve in the first place as a company and what values you are driven by, then it can actually lead to real challenges. So I think that is very important, and I think leadership is hugely important. And one of my favorite quotes, it doesn't necessarily apply to the overall theme of organizational design, but I think it does show how important leadership is from Alexander the Great, and he said that he was more scared of one lion leading 1,000 sheep than one sheep leading 1,000 lions. And I think it's a very relevant quote, because it just shows the overall impact that whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 individuals can have at the top of an organization, who end up setting a lot of the vision and setting a lot of the traction that everybody's trying to achieve, and then get everybody in unison to follow behind. And as I say, it's not a numbers game, it's an employee engagement game, where to me the two main themes that are absolutely fundamental in having the right organizational design is having effective networking. Even if your organization is 10 people, doesn't matter, effective networking internally, and effective collaboration. And you have those two, and then I think you're very much on your way to having the right overall org design. So I'll stop there. Pretty much I'll wrap up in kind of a couple of minutes. So just to sort of summarize overall, I think that we are at an extremely exciting juncture for our industry. The tragedy that obviously we have faced as a society over the last 3 months is very real. There is huge uncertainty about where we go from here. We're reading the news on China this morning, and you just realize that we're in, yes, we keep talking about unprecedented times, but even having gone through these 3 months, and as a society, we've faced these challenges, and we're very proud that we've adapted so quickly. Yet I think it's still fair to say that you're going to look at the next 6, 12, 18 months, and who knows what's coming our way. Having said that, the adaptability we've shown so far gives you a lot of reasons for hope. And us as an industry, we play a key role. It's something that I think about a lot. It's not about whether we sell more, whether we grow more as a company, whether we suddenly become hugely profitable as a result of all of this. No, it's the responsibility that we have to play a key role in securing the ecosystem that we're very proud to be a part of. And that to me is the key. A few trends that we have that bring us to where we are right now, a few learnings over the last 3 months, clearly a different way of doing things when it comes to people kind of having the right organizational design, and then the role that we need to play. But for us as an industry, I'd say the future is bright, but at the same time we have a massive responsibility, and that's not a bad thing to have. So I think pretty much on time. I'll stop there. I hope that was interesting to some. Always feel free to follow up with me. Twitter, email dlopez@glasswallsolutions.com. And I look forward to talking and following up with a number of you. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Danny.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay. So Danny has just said his email address, and you can reach him if you have any further questions.
Cool.